The original Daredevil series is probably one of the most beloved pieces of superhero media of all time. I, as well as many other fans, immediately fell in love with its story, characters, and unmatched action sequences. So I think it's safe to say that Daredevil Born Again had some massive shoes to fill. I knew it more than likely wouldn't live up to the original, but I was confident that Marvel would be able to put their own spin on it in a positive way. Considering they had 3 seasons of the original to build off of, and those seasons being very solid. Now, all things considered, I feel like the new creative team did the very best they could considering the mess that was the original direction the show was headed. Supposedly, the show was originally going to be just a lawyer drama with little to no mention of Daredevil, which why would anyone want that? And although this show did have its highlights, as a whole, this show suffers from a mix of bad decisions and missed opportunities. Starting with the worst decision as well as my biggest issue with the show, the death of one of the most important supporting characters in the series. Now, in a previous video, I'd mentioned how from the very beginning, I hated that they killed off Foggy Nelson, and that I hated the way they handled his death. I hate that they killed Foggy. The way they just killed off the main character's best friend in the first episode, then it was hardly ever mentioned throughout the entirety of the show, was crazy to me. I feel like Foggy's death should have had a much bigger impact on Matt's life as a whole, as well as played a role in his willingness to be Daredevil again. But it feels as though they only killed Foggy as an excuse to make Matt more violent, in order to sell the idea that this show is more violent and gruesome than the original. That concept of this show being more violent than the original was tossed around by Marvel a lot during the promotion for this show, and besides making him more ruthless, it seems as though Foggy's death didn't have as much impact on Matt's life as it should have. It's only until episode 4 that Foggy's death is even properly addressed through Matt's conversation with Punisher, which I'll admit was a very emotional scene as well as one of the best exchanges in the show, but is unfortunately one of the only times we get to see how Foggy's death has affected Matt. His death should have also played a big role in Matt's willingness to be Daredevil again, but it literally doesn't. Just decides to be Daredevil again after Angela Del Toro gets kidnapped by Muse. Which, okay, sure, but in that case, where were you when all those other people needed help for a whole year? It's okay now because you know the victim. His return to Daredevil just holds no weight and feels super unearned. On the topic of supporting characters, I feel like the show also lacked real supporting characters. Every new character that was introduced in this show felt severely underdeveloped and uninteresting. We got Cherry, Kirsten, BB Urich, and Heather to name a few. Cherry and Kirsten basically replaced Foggy and Karen for some reason, and throughout the entire show, I felt no connection to them whatsoever. You could definitely feel Foggy and Karen's absence in this show, and I have no idea why they decided to make Karen leave for the entire show. They make it seem as though we're supposed to know and care about these new characters, even though they're frankly very boring characters that serve nothing to Matt's character. Especially Heather, who was supposed to be Matt's love interest, didn't really sell me on the idea of her and Matt as a couple. I feel like there could have been a very interesting plot point to be explored where Heather, being a therapist and all, would have been able to help Matt through his grief and trauma after Foggy's death. Kinda like Father Lantham was in season 3. Someone who's just there for him and kind of guides him while he balances his life as Daredevil. But instead, she kind of just ended up serving as bait for Matt's villains to dangle in front of him, especially compared to Matt's previous love interests such as Karen, Elektra, and Claire, who, beyond being a love interest, actually served a purpose beyond Matt's story, while Heather is just an empty shell of a character whose only purpose is to hold Matt back. Another character that was completely wasted in this show was Muse. He was being hyped up to be the big villain for this show, and a really interesting one at that, being a perfect counter for Daredevil in the comics because of his powers of being imperceivable. But this guy was in the show for a max screen time of like 30 minutes, and there was nothing more to his character other than being a run-of-the-mill serial killer. And he's killed off immediately by one of the worst characters in the show. Now, there are rumors that he will be returning in season 2, so hopefully they'll redeem his character a little bit and they'll make him an actual threat this time. I feel like a villain that was portrayed much better in this show was Wilson Bethel's Bullseye. At this point, I feel like Bullseye should be in the conversation for being one of the best villains in the MCU. Every time he was on screen, you just feel anxious because he's such an unpredictable character and you have no idea what he's gonna do next. All his scenes were so fun to watch, especially in episode 8 with the prison escape scene. I feel like he really stood out in this show much more than Muse ever did, even though they had about the same amount of screen time. Now, as a whole, this show isn't bad by any means, especially compared to some of the other Marvel Disney Plus shows, but I feel like it didn't live up to how great it could have potentially been. There were so many great potential plot points and story elements that would have been so cool to see if done right. Muse as a villain being a very obvious one. The vigilante task force and Punisher dynamic that we don't really get to see a lot of until the very last episode. It just felt like the show opened up all these different plot points and possibilities and didn't really expand on any of them, so the season as a whole just feels kind of half-baked. The creative overhaul was definitely necessary because this show is moving at a snail's pace. Nothing was really happening for like the first half of episodes other than maybe the trial of Hector Ayala in episode 3, which I did really like and thought was a good Matt Murdock lawyer episode. I feel like this show also really struggles with that balance between Matt and Daredevil stories, which the original show had down to a science. The original was great at displaying both sides of Daredevil's life, both his life as a lawyer and as a vigilante. But I feel like Born Again had a lot more Matt than Daredevil, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it is called Daredevil and we get significantly more Matt in this show and his character isn't even fully fledged out in my opinion. But after episodes 8 and 9, I'm pretty confident that season 2 will have a much more solid and cohesive vision for this show. I'm hoping that they expand on why Foggy was killed and I'm hoping that they redeem Muse as a villain. But besides that, what do you guys think of Born Again? Do you love it and can't wait for season 2? Do you hate it and wish you'd also been blinded by toxic chemicals? Let me know.
Boom, 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 boom.